Good afternoon. I'm Ryan Ruskin, President and CEO of the Ruskin Group and second Vice Chair of the club. And welcome to the 16th annual discussion series founded by Charlie Bobrinskoy in 2005 and moderated by the Henry Crown Fellows of the Aspen Institute. We've covered great thinkers and leaders from Aristotle to Mandela to Catherine the Great to Charlie's Rappin' Hamilton not so long ago. And in 2020, the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment that actually occurred 100 years ago last month. And in a year of social unrest, the heightened fight for racial justice, and the renewed assault on voting rights, we wanted to bring these issues home to Chicago and front and center for the Economic Club of Chicago. So we chose civil rights leader and activist Ida B. Wells. And also we chose to do this on National Voter Registration Day too. In describing Wells, there were several pithy analogies that I like. One was that she was the Rosa Parks before Rosa Parks, having been forcibly removed from a first-class ladies rail car for her race in 1884. She subsequently sued the railroad and initially won the case, which was of course overturned later, and also refused to march at the back of the 1913 Women's Suffrage Parade in DC, choosing instead to march with the Illinois delegation she helped to organize. She was also social media before social media, writing and often self-publishing on the atrocities of the day, including Southern lynching and Black exclusion from the Chicago Columbian Exposition. Ida was Black Lives Matter before Black Lives Matter in many ways, writing and drawing national attention to lynching and the lack of justice and legal protections for Blacks in the South. And some could say she was the John Lewis before John Lewis or MLK before MLK, for organizing locally, nationally, and internationally for civil rights throughout her career, focusing on women's suffrage and founding organizations like the NAACP and dozens more. But really, Wells was more than a version of any of these folks. She was a historic force who fought on so many fronts and faced so many challenges personally and professionally. I have to admit, as a student of American and social history, I didn't know most of her story or legacy until recently. So we have three goals for today. One is to share and learn about Ida B. Wells' story as one of Chicago's and the country's greatest activists and civil rights leaders. Two is to examine her life and the issues she cared about and the strategies and tactics she used. And three is to figure out what we can do to be more effective in today's fights based on Ida's experiences. So first, a few details on tonight's program. We are thrilled to have with us today Michelle Duster, Ida's great-granddaughter, who will provide the overview and key points in getting to know Ida B. Wells. Then we will move into small breakout groups for 40-minute discussions, reconvening at 5 p.m. for a brief wrap-up, concluding by 5:15, I promise. Please remember to turn off your camera, mute your audio, and switch to speaker view for the overview section, which, along with the wrap-up, but not the breakouts, is being recorded. It's now my pleasure to introduce Michelle Duster, as I've said, Ida B. Wells' great-granddaughter. Michelle is an accomplished author, professor, speaker, and civil rights activist, championing racial and gender equity. She has written, edited, or contributed to 11 books, including her new book coming out in January titled Ida B. the Queen. Michelle's advocacy has led to public history projects highlighting women and African Americans, including historical markers, honors, and the renaming of streets, including Chicago's own Congress Parkway in honor of Ida in 2018. She's a native Chicagoan and connected to the Economic Club through her father's longtime membership. We are thrilled and honored to have you with us today, Michelle. The floor is yours.
Wow, Ryan, thank you so much for that really flattering introduction. And thank you to David Snyder, Katie Esposito, Hannah Bull, and everybody else who's affiliated with the Economic Club of Chicago for having me. As Ryan mentioned, my father, Donald Duster, was a member of the Economic Club for 36 years. So I do have a little bit of connection to the club. And just so you understand how I'm related to Ida B. Wells, my father, Donald Duster, was Ida's grandson. So I'm related to Ida through my father. His mother was Ida's youngest daughter. And his mother's name was Alfreda Barnett Duster, and she's the one who edited her mother's autobiography and got it published in 1970. So I know I don't have a whole lot of time, and I'm going to try to say as much information as I can about my great-grandmother in 20 minutes. So this will be a brief overview of her life. So as you know, she was a teacher, a journalist, a civil rights activist, a suffragist. I've considered her to be an institution builder and a social worker. And I might be one of the few people who actually views her as a businesswoman as well, because she co-owned several newspapers. And for me, the common thread through all of her work was that she was fighting for first-class citizenship. So just to give you, I've categorized her life into those different sort of buckets. And so I'm going to talk about first what I feel shaped her. And really, it was Reconstruction, because she was born in 1862 in Holly Springs, Mississippi. She was born into slavery as the oldest of 8 children. Her father was a carpenter and her mother was a cook. She was able to attend Russ College as, among the first generation of formerly enslaved people to get a formal education. She grew up during a time, like I said, during Reconstruction, where there was a slew of amendments to the Constitution right after the Civil War. The 13th Amendment, which banned slavery, the 14th Amendment, which dealt with citizenship, and then the 15th Amendment, which gave formerly enslaved Black men the right to vote. So Ida's father, Jim Wells, was actually very involved politically, and he he voted. And so Ida grew up in a very politically oriented environment. And unfortunately, she was orphaned in 1878 at the age of 16, when both of her parents died of a yellow fever epidemic. So that left her, she made the decision to take over being the caregiver for her 5 surviving siblings. One of her siblings died in the yellow fever epidemic also. She worked as a teacher in rural Mississippi for a little over 2 years, and then she moved to Memphis and lived with one of her aunts. She and 2 of her youngest sisters lived in Memphis. And so Memphis is what shaped her as an activist and where she got started as a journalist. She started writing for church newspapers as kind of like what we call today a side gig from her teaching. She was teaching in racially segregated schools, at first in Woodstock, Tennessee. And so that's how she kind of got into activism when it came to the train situation, because she was commuting back and forth between Memphis and Woodstock to get to her job. And she was accosted one day first there were 2 incidents, one in 1883 when she was going from Memphis to Woodstock, and then another time in 1884, which is more well known, on May 4th, 1884, when she was actually going from Woodstock to Memphis. So between these 2 situations, she was fed up with being accosted and singled out and discriminated against. So she did file a suit against the Chesapeake, Ohio and Southwestern Railroad in 1884. She originally won, and then it was overturned in 1887 because the railroad decided to appeal it all the way to the Tennessee Supreme Court. And so that really shaped her. And the other thing that really shaped her was she, in 1891, became part owner of the Memphis Free Speech. And she promptly she became owner in 1889. And then in 1891, she wrote an article about the discrimination or the inequity in the school districts. And as a result, she lost her job. And so one of the quotes that I think is really interesting of hers is, "The people must know before they can act, and there is no educator to compare with the press." So she really believed that people need to be informed about what's going on. And she felt that there was a power in having information, shared with the public. In 1892, that was a turning point in her life. 3 of her friends were lynched for being successful business owners. Their competitor decided that he wanted to eliminate the competition. And so he trumped up all of these charges, and basically, long story short, he and some of his friends decided to attack the grocery store. The grocery store owners defended themselves, and then everything turned around so that they were the aggressors. Does that sound familiar today? So her friends were lynched. And so Ida decided that she was going to write about what was going on regarding lynching, because she knew her friends were innocent of any crime. And so she wondered how many other people were innocent of crimes. So she started investigating different lynchings and found over and over again that a lot of time, most times people were innocent of a crime, or if they were guilty of a crime, it was a very minor crime. So she put two and two together and realized that lynching was being used as a form of domestic terrorism to keep people down, to keep the Black community down. She wrote about it so much that she ended up being threatened by the, she encouraged people to boycott the streetcars in Memphis. She also encouraged people to not frequent white-owned businesses, because she realized, and this is her quote, "The appeal to the white man's pocket has ever been more effectual than all the appeals ever made to his conscience." So she encouraged people to hit people where they felt, where they could actually feel some kind of pain, which was economically. So she was causing so much havoc in Memphis that her life was actually threatened, and she continued to write even though she was being threatened. And when she was out of town later on in 1892, her printing press was destroyed, and she was threatened with basically death if she actually returned. So she went to New York City and was working with T. Thomas Fortune on his New York Age newspaper. And this is another place where I feel like her business savvy came in, because he asked her for her subscription list to the Memphis Free Speech, and she made a deal with him that she would give it to him if she got 1/4 ownership of the newspaper. When she was writing for the New York Gate, she wrote a series of articles about what was going on regarding lynching, with the idea that if Northerners were informed about what was going, there could be outside pressure put on the South. Those articles were eventually compiled into a pamphlet that she self-published called Southern Horrors, Lynch Law in All Its Phases, and that was in 1892. Based on all the work that she was doing in New York City, where she was writing and she was also doing a lot of speaking, she got asked to go to England to speak to the British about what was going on in this country. And actually, I compiled her articles that she wrote when she went to England into a book that we can read today called Ida from Abroad. She also got asked by Frederick Douglass to come to Chicago in 1893 to help on a pamphlet called "The Reason Why the Colored American is Not in the Columbian Exposition." And I also compiled her part of that pamphlet for another book called Ida in Her Own Words, because I thought it was interesting how she used the printed press to expose what was going on in this country. And another quote of hers that I think kind of captures her goal was, "The mob spirit has grown with the increasing intelligence of the Afro-American." So she viewed what was going on as a way of oppressing Black progress, basically. So that's how she came to Chicago, first in 1893. She went back to England in 1894. And then she came back to Chicago eventually in 1895, and she got married to Ferdinand Barnett, who was one of the contributors of the pamphlet that was distributed at the World's Fair. Now, when she comes to, in my opinion, being an institution builder, she founded the Ida B. Wells Club in 1893 here in Chicago. In 1896, she was one of the co-founders of the National Association of Colored Women. In 1909, she was one of the co-founders of the NAACP. in 1913. She was the founder of the Alpha Suffrage Club, which was the first all-Black suffrage club in Illinois. And that's where she was representing the Alpha Suffrage Club when she marched in the parade in Washington, D.C. And then she got involved in 1913 with the National Equal Rights League, and then she founded the Negro Fellowship League in 1910, which was sort of a rooming house and a community center for Southern migrants. And so she was involved in so many different organizations. That's just to mention a few. And that's where I think her social work comes in with the Negro Fellowship League, which a lot of people don't really know about that, but that's what she was kind of involved in more locally here in Chicago. The first location was at 28th and State, and then she eventually moved to 30th and State, which is where IIT is currently located. And a quote that she had, which sort of gives information about what her thought process was the doors of churches, hotels, concert halls, and reading rooms are alike closed against the Negro as a man, but every place is open to him as a servant. So she really felt that the way that our society is structured blocks Black progress from every direction that you could possibly think of. And so she was trying to take it upon herself to provide some kind of opportunity for people who were coming here to Chicago and finding themselves locked out. She also founded the first kindergarten in Chicago for Black children in 1897. So this multi-pronged approach that she had to fighting against second-class citizenship. She fought for the rights for equal education, for equal accommodations on public transportation, for legal protection against brutality, housing, job opportunities, and she also fought for the right to vote. And I think it's important for people to learn about her today. And my family has worked for 8 decades, for now 3 going on 4 generations, to make sure that she gets the credit that we feel that she deserves. And hopefully you all agree that she deserves to be as well known as possible. And like Ryan mentioned, just a few things that our family has done was, like I said, my grandmother edited the autobiography of her mother called Crusade for Justice. There were Ida B. Wells homes located in Chicago between 37th and 39th, King Drive and Cottage Grove, for over 60 years here in Chicago. Once those started to become eliminated, then I actually got involved with a committee to have a monument created in her honor, which will be installed on the land where the Ida B. Wells homes were. My father, who some of you probably did know, was one of the founders of the Ida B. Wells Memorial Foundation in 1988, and we give scholarships to in Ida's honor at her alma mater, Rusk College, as well as support other public history projects. And then, like I've mentioned, I've written several books, and then we have Ida B. Wells Drive, Ida B. Wells Way, and a historical marker located at 37th and King Drive. So I actually took a little bit less time than I was allotted, but hopefully that gives you a reasonable overview of who my great-grandmother was and what she did.